Good morning, everyone. On behalf of City University, would take pleasure of welcoming Miss Aishwarya Aneja, Assistant Professor, School of Law, City University. Had done her graduation and master's from MIT University in the field of IPR and has an industrial experience of 2 years in Court of Delhi, High Court, as well as Supreme Court. Presently pursuing PhD in IPR, fashion laws, going to deliver the session on the topic how to plan startup and legal ethical steps. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am. A very good morning to all present. The topic for the day is uh, basically we are talking on startup. As moving in the today's era, startup is something that the youth is basically moving towards. So before we come into the phase of starting a startup, there are a lot of ideas that we get, and once that idea comes to us, we start working on those ideas. So the topic for the day is how do we plan to start a startup and what are the legal and ethical issues that are involved in the progressing of that particular startup. So basically when we start a startup, there are basically four stages which come in the initial times. So the first one is ideation. Now ideation basically refers to, for example, there is some idea that comes to us and we think that this is something that we are going to open a business upon or we are going to work upon. So ideation is considered as the first stage where we begin with the startup. Ideation is where the idea comes and we basically see, is that product fit for the market or not. That market research which goes is known as ideation, based on the web that we already have. If a product comes, that product has to have certain minute things into it, seeing into consideration, looking into consideration what are those small points and what are the things on which we need to work upon. That is the first stage and that is basically known as ideation. The next stage comes is market fit. When we talk about market fit, we basically talk about areas concerning sale. From where are we going to procure that particular product, what is going to be our margin and what is going to be our price. Because as in seeing the today's era, the world is a very competitive. Even if you want to set up into any new you want to come into any new industry, there are certain protocols which you need to follow. For the same purpose, certain points have to be kept in mind. The geographical territories, for example, if you want to work on a certain product, you basically want to know that will I be only working in the territories of Punjab or I'll be moving outside. If we plan to move outside, the costing, the buying, the margin of the things would be totally different. So taking into consideration all these points, the basic ideation of the startup basically works. Then we have the prototype development, which is also known as pilot study. Now pilot study is basically when that thing is being made, you are already gone through that process. What would be, from where will the procurement happen, from what would be the sale amount, what would be the profit amount, and you are ready with that sample. Then we move towards the market, that you basically have a research study where from the people you take the approval that is this product something which can be used in the further in the coming times and would be beneficial for the people as well. Because any idea that comes to us might be good for us, but would it be implemented in today's era is the second foundation of a startup. After that we have a product market type. Now talking in terms of startup only, any new product that comes, there are a lot of boundaries to that. We need to take into consideration the people that we are targeting, the area that we are targeting. Is the product considered to be fit for that area or not fit for that area? Then comes the commencement of operations and sales. When we talk about commencement of operations, there are a lot of things that come into matter. Feasibility is one of them. The operations which would operate, what would be the pricing of that, how would we basically start interpreting on those things, how will those things be fruitful for us and the society as a large. So all these four ideas are the first pillars on which the startup basically starts. So first one is ideation, The next is basically prototype development, which is also known as pilot study, where the procedure of sampling takes place. Then we have product market fit. Is that product which we have designed will be used by the people or not? Fourth comes the commencement of operations and sales. When all these factors are taken into consideration, the sub themes of these are whether the procurement would be done, the market and the price and the territories would be taken into consideration. Moving forward, whenever we start with a startup, there are a lot of formalities that need to be done, and those formalities are also being done as per the Companies Act 2013. So whenever you plan to open any business or work on those, there is some legal constitution which you need to follow. Constitution in startup basically refers to that under what umbrella do you wish to work, under what umbrella would your startup come. So first of them is proprietorship firm, next is partnership firm, third is private limited company or a limited company, and fourth is LLP. LLP basically refers to limited liability partnership. Now, as the word partnership firm prescribes, if you really want to solely want to work towards the company, you are the only person who wishes to work for this company, work for this startup, so you come under the umbrella of a proprietorship firm. Then partnership firm basically refers to when there is more than one partner who is working in your firm, that is known as partnership firm. When there are more people, they are joining hands with you and they are working with you, that is known as partnership firm. Then we move to private limited firm or limited firm, where there are shareholders, actual owners, and directors. When we are talking about this private limited company, here the word limitation basically refers to that we have shareholders in this, we have directors in this, and we have the people who are day to day engaging in the work of the startup. Now the word limitation is being used into this because if there is any fraud or if there is anything done into that company, the liability of those shareholders would be only limited to the amount they have spent into that company. Then the limited liability company. Now this limited liability partnership is again where the liability of the partners again remains to be fixed, and it is not much, only the amount which is the shareholders have spent, only that amount will come into the picture. Now this limited liability partnership is a hybrid form of entity. It is 50% company and 50% partnership. Because it is 50% company and 50% partnership, that is why it is known as a hybrid form of entity. Now these are basically the four ways under which your startup may follow, and under which umbrella do you wish to work further upon that. That is known as the legal constitution of a startup. Now these all four are the ways which I have told you under which you can work for your startup. Moving to another topic is what is the preferred routes. Now in all four of these which I have told you, there are two preferred routes. One is through private limited company, or one is LLP, limited liability partnership. Now in India, basically the recognition is being done by DIPP, which is the Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion. If you want to start any startup, so the registration of that is basically, the recognition of that is being done by Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion. Now being professionals entering into the field of startup, it is being referred that you must take two preferred routes. One is through the private limited company, the limited company, and one is the LLP. The reason for this is that DIPP gives benefit to those who are registered under these two. Now there are certain benefits that you get of recognition. One of the benefits is very obvious, that if you have a startup and that is being already recognized by DIPP, so what happens is you get a lot of favor when you are moving towards the business, because it is considered authentic. Whatever you are working, whatever staff you have employed, and whatever product you wish to sell in the market, that is very much authentic. So moving further with that, there are certain benefits. First of all is trademark filing cost. Now basically these benefits are given just to take into consideration that if see, there is no compulsion that it has to be registered or not registered, but if it is registered, what happens is that you can keep a track of the product that are being registered and how it is flowing into the market. So certain, they have given the benefits after you're done with the registration. The first is trademark filing cost. The trademark filing cost reduces if your product has been recognized by DIPP. Second is free accounting solutions. You get that as well only if you are recognized. Then you have bank subsidy grants. Bank subsidy grants basically help you a lot in growing up with your business, because startup is basically considered when you are coming up with a new product. So funding is the basic root of a startup, from where you will get the funding. How will the banks help you, how will you get the loans? All these things are considered to be as one of the important pillars and one of the important factors in commencing of any startup. Then income tax law also plays a lot of value in this, and it also has a lot of benefits that you might get if you are registered under the DIPP. So this was the legal constitution, and under the legal constitution there were 4 heads that have been specified. And after that, what are the preferred routes under which it can work, and we can register it to get certain benefits. Then comes certain legal and ethical steps. When we are talking about legal and ethical steps, we basically talk about that there are certain contracts and agreements in a startup which are very essential and should be done. Now these contracts, these agreements that we are talking about, they can be the duties and obligations of the parties towards each other. Because once a startup, you come into planning of a startup, you start with the sales, you start with the operations. There is obviously two-party operations that are going on. So because of these two-party operations that are going on, it is compulsory that certain contracts and agreements need to be signed so that we can move forward with the proper implementation of those things. Now there are certain these contracts and agreements which I just told you, we are talking about in general, that contracts and agreements. Now talking specific in terms of startups, so we have certain startup specific contracts. Now those are founder agreements. Who is the founder? He may have certain agreements that these are all the points upon which we will be working. Then there are vendor agreements. Vendor agreements basically refers to that when you are working with somebody, how will the purchase happen, how will the execution happen, all these things are basically being mentioned under the vendor agreement. Then if you are a company, if you are registered, you are planning a startup, you will obviously have certain employees. So again, the employee agreement is required to execute the jobs further. Then you have franchisee model. If you are working on a startup which is based on franchisee business model, so there are certain terms and conditions, there are certain contracts and agreements which are being laid out, and you need to sign those according to the franchisee business model. Now all these, basically the thing is that the crux of this is that in order to avoid any problems that might occur in the upcoming future, you need to have these documents made, because there are a lot of legal routes as well that you can go forward if certain thing wrong happens or some wrong path happens. The company law also defines it. So basically it is that if any further problem arises in your business, and if you have signed certain agreements and contracts, so those are certain things which might save you and you can run safely through your business. For example, if you plan to have you wish to do some import or export of the product as well, then again there are certain agreements which you need to sign, and based upon those things, these things would arise, that what are the terms and conditions already mentioned to it, and further you will move with that. Then there are certain ethics are basically considered to be something that would monitor the conduct of your day-to-day affairs of a startup. If we talk in terms of a layman language, ethics basically refers to when we are basically talking about that if you are starting a startup, you shouldn't enter into any unfair practice, you shouldn't do anything which basically which basically is not going good with the relations among your vendors, among the franchisee models, among the import and export taking over. So we have, in as talking in reference specifically to startup, there is this term corporate governance. Now corporate governance again refers to that, you know, there are certain SOPs that you need to follow, standard operating procedures which you need to follow for your company, that how will those procedures work and how you will be able to manage those things. Now moving forward, when we are talking about the ethical conduct, there this you have this private limited company. So here what happens is, if there is a private limited company, as I told you earlier as well, the liability of those members basically reduces to certain level. So here what happens is, the company law 2013 states that there have to be certain committees which you need to follow. If you have a startup, if you have come up with a startup, so you need to have a committee which needs to be formed when you are registering yourself again in the BIPP. Again, that says that you need to have a certain committees made for that, so that any issues that arises in the future might not come. So there are certain committees which can be formed for the ethical administration of a startup. First is basically by the that basically refers to that how the implementation of law, how through the law we can take this into consideration. So first is the formation of independent committee to review the conduct of affairs of a company. In the company that you are working in, there should be a specifically focused company which is only and only working upon seeing and monitoring what are the day-to-day tasks, because signing of the agreements is being done, the firm in which you need to enter is already being done, steps from your side have already been taken. But even if you are the founder of the company, you are the director of the company, you are the shareholder of the company, it is not possible for you to personally monitor the day-to-day tasks happening in the company. So taking into consideration, all these startups need to form certain companies as given under the Companies Act 2013 as well, which includes the formation of an independent committee. Now when this independent committee comes up, it needs to have certain rules and regulations made, and the company is obliged to move upon those factors. Then you should have the appointment of independent directors. As the directors are working, these independent directors will also be working and seeing towards the tasks that are happening that are taking place in the company. It should be taken into consideration that any amount that comes from the company should be utilized only in the business sphere. It should only be there to expand that business and should not be used in any other thing. So all these things should be seen by the directors themselves. There should be a specific committee who is responsible for that, so that we can basically say that there is less mistake and more accountability towards things. Because if anything happens wrong and proper procedures have not been laid out by the law, no ethical procedure, no legal formation is being done by any of the committee, then what happens is, there has been a history, there has been many cases where it has been seen that because of not having proper agreements being signed, the startup was working well, but these deficits which come into the company may lead to failure of a lot of businesses, because it is anywhere where third party intervention comes into the picture. So automatically issues, disputes are bound to arise, and there is where these problems come. And if you are having these committees, you might fight for an infringement against this as well. So seeing that taking that into consideration, we'll say that there should be a formation of a system of internal control process. Now internal control process basically refers to that whatever are the ongoing operations happening in the company, whenever there is any third party supervision that is being required, so there should be strict SOPs which should not only be given to the internal staff as well. Those SOPs should be also given to persons who are working outside as well. If you have any third party third party invention in your own company, so those rules and regulations should be laid down for them as well. if you get into the seeing the stories of the people who are getting into the startups and how those startups are being working and having all the mechanisms, they have all the funding, they have all the mechanisms available with them, but the startups which are not working on only the reason because people do not get their startups recognized by DIPP. They fail to get all the benefits which should be given under them, and the formation of companies, because there is no stringent rule, there is no strict law which says that you need to get it recognized. You are just starting with a startup, and when you get the recognition of those things, there are certain amount of fees also that you have to pay for that recognition. Only then you get those benefits. But again, this step is being taken, this task is being done to just take into consideration that all these things prove to be effective for the people and they can use it well for their upcoming business. Then you have the this person Ashneer Grover. He is facing, I guess all of you might have heard his word. He is from the Shark Tank, and he is facing certain legal issues over diversion of funds. So diversion of funds basically refers to that any amount that is coming out of it should be used only for the purpose of business only, because it has been seen that a lot of partnership firms, a lot of private limited firms, what is happening is their funds are getting diverted into a wrong direction. Because the funds not been getting utilized into a good direction, all these issues arise and startups do fail. What all points I've mentioned earlier are the legal spheres, are the legal constitutions under which a startup works, and how the law which has been given, how that law, how that umbrella can protect them even if any issue arises out of that. Now this if we talk about this Ashneer Grover case, this also came into consideration because it was seen that there was a lot of diversion of funds. The profits which were coming, the funds which was coming, were supposed to be used for the interest of the company itself, but it was seen that these funds, instead of being utilized, instead of being used for the company only, it was being used for something else. Now, for example, when we are talking about the companies, when we are talking about certain SOPs which needs to be followed, taking an example of, for example, a printer gets damaged. So how will that printer, a new printer will come, what would be the procedure that we need to follow, what would be the request time? The request time should be, it should be made to the purchase department. They should at least take price from 3 vendors and should get the best price. After that, again an estimate needs to be approved. After that estimate is approved, then it should finally get into the company. So all these procedures that we are talking about, all these steps that we are talking about should be taken into consideration, just because of the fact that it ultimately leads to the interest of the startups and ultimately leads to the funding of the startups. Because the major problem that arises in startups is only limited to the costing and the funding. So any business, any new route that you are growing, the foremost pillar, the foremost thing that includes in this is that how do you wish to proceed further with that, which basically leads to that there should be this maker and checker concept. Now, maker and checker concept is something that is very common in company law, and maker and checker concept basically refers to that any operations which are going on in your company, anything which is being going on in your company, should be done in such a way that you are able to check, you are able to verify that all the external internal resources which are made in such a way which only prove to be beneficial for the company in its own self. Now, talking in terms of a layman language, that what all wrong ethical steps arise, the first of it is fraud. We have seen a lot of cases where fraud is being done amongst the company, amongst the directors are involved, and again the concept of liability comes, the shareholders are held responsible for that. Next comes fund. Now, fund is something that you get funds from the bank as well, you get funding from outside as well, you get funding from certain partners as well. How those things should be utilized, what specific routes should be made in order to utilize, in order to manage that, how can we basically help with the procurement of those things, how can we basically move with the reduction of cost and all those things. Now what is happening is people who are starting up startups, they do have good ideation, they do come up with good ideation, their samples do work out, but what happens is the major issue arises is when the funds are not being utilized in the proper, because any startup that you start, the law of the business basically says whenever you are starting with any business, whenever you are starting with anything, the first responsibility is your own business, because until and unless it does not grow well, until and unless the cost of which is not met well, you are unable to grow, because business is the startup is the another word for business, and businesses just don't grow in a day's time, or there are a lot of legal steps that you need to follow initially, and after these legal steps that you need to follow, you need to put into consideration that once a startup initially starts, there are a lot of ups and downs which do come into this time. Now the if we talk in terms of the stability of a startup, it is very important that unrealistic targets should not be given by any of the investors. When investors put pressure for growth on founders, the founder tries to achieve through unfair means. If anybody is basically investing into your business, if anybody is basically investing onto those things, so you, just because you have got a funding, just because you have got a target from the investor, so you should not give them anything, you should not adopt any kind of unfair means. If you start adopting those unfair means, there is where all these things do not go well, and there is when the business can't even rise, because if you are going up in a proper form, how can it grow out of it, because a startup is something that you are initially starting. So a startup is like a small plant. Any small plant that you grow, you need to have a proper care, nourishment for the same, and adequate care on daily basis. So you must consider that any business we are starting, any startup we are starting, is basically a kind of a small plant. All the things should be given in such a way that it can grow well. Legal issues arise only when agreements are not made foolproof. Now here it basically refers to that anything, if there are certain legal issues that arise, that only arise because, as I told you earlier, the Company Act also says, the law also gives you various provisions where it is mandatory for you to make certain rules and regulations. So if those rules and regulations are not being made, SOPs are not being followed, it becomes a matter of concern, and there where your stability would be questioned. The investors who are investing a good amount for you will again face a lot of problems. If we talk only in terms of the ethical issues that are being arising, ethical issues might not only arise if certain thing wrong is being done within also. If you are working with a vendor, or if you are working with certain franchisee model, and that is also not working well with you, they are not following your SOPs, you have not given them a proper format of the SOPs that you follow, again there will be a lot of problem in the growing of that particular startup. Being courageous is important in a startup. Being ambitious is also important, because the rule of business, because the rule of startup says that there will be certain ups and downs that you need to follow. And I guess this is something that exists for every person who is coming up with something new, who is coming up with some new idea, who wants to really set up himself in the competitive world, in the competitive market. It is important that because of the growing competition, you might face ups and downs, but you need to be courageous and you need to be ambitious. But ambition also needs to be managed practically, because what happens is that once you start with the business, it starts growing in the market, you have a lot of investors for it, then you think that there is no end to this. But again we come to the initial point of the business, the world is very competitive. The moment you try that, you are having a your product is something that is only selling into the market, no other product can come up, there is, you are the one who is growing everything, there is where the problems come. Because if you take example of any business that is even growing, you will always see that any product, you cannot stay stable to your own product always. A lot of patents is being done, a lot of R&D is being done. All those factors contribute a lot, because until and unless you are well settled in your business, because there is no R&D that is happening, ultimately it would not lead to a successful business ahead. Because all these problems do create a problem, because your product that has been made, another person who wishes to start up a business, another person who wants to come with a startup would be, focusing on a lot of things, and would try to come up with a business, would try to come up with some product which is obviously better than your product. So all these, if we basically talk about ideation, now ideation, market research, product market fit, and commencement of operations, all these are considered as the four pillars, as the four factors after which we really consider that now we can start a startup, and under which umbrella our product would fit. But this might be considered as the first step. But once you plan to grow your business, once you plan to have a growth towards it, the R&D research is the only factor that will help you in growing that business. There is a lot of importance that is being given to third party supervision. Now these third party supervision that we are talking about, you might have different partners, you might have different people funding you, you might have different investors investing into you. So what happens is that once you are working into all these things, you, until and unless you do not grow upon them also, there has to be certain growth on these factors as well, and your standard operating procedures. Because standard operating procedure should be made well in time, when you think that now your product is market fit. The moment you get this thing into consideration that our product is totally market fit, people would really, like to have that product, you are basically growing into that area, that is the time you should start preparing for your standard operating procedures. And the two routes which are being preferred for this is the LLP and the private limited company. Because if you are already registered under these things, you get a lot of benefits for those things. It might also take up in IPR, because whenever you're filing any trademark you do file, when you come up with some new business, you have some logo or something, you do come with those marks, so government does give you all those things. So it is considered important for you that you take all these things into consideration. If we talk about the legal ethical steps involved under the legal constitution, now the legal constitution also gives you various fields where it is important for you, that where you can invest, and from where you can get a lot of investing from the bank also, from where you can have the other investors. How will you make into consideration that your business is being visible to the public at large? Because if anybody wants to invest in your business also, then also you need to show them that our product is basically working in the market. So again, you need to have certain SOPs for that. Based upon those SOPs, you can come up with certain conclusion that now, because we have strong SOPs, our product is working in the market, so we can move ahead with that. So this is what was how to plan a startup. How to start a planner is basically, we have 4 steps when we move, which basically refers to ideation, market research, product market fit, and commencement of operations. Next comes the umbrella under which you should set up your business. Then comes the importance of third party supervision and agreements, and then finally your SOPs. So that is all that we have done about the planning of a startup, the legal steps involved, the legal constitution involved, and the ethical steps involved in that. Anybody has any question? Purva ma'am, are you there?
Yes, ma'am. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much for the wonderful session, ma'am.
Thank you.
The session was so informative. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you so much, all the attendees who attended the session. I hope the session proved to be, effective for all of you. Is there any question? Thank you.